Hey everyone. Just finished working on one of my projects, which reminds me that I don't speak French anywhere near as well as I'd like to. Reading through the Gospel of Matthew, and just in the first, I just finished up the first two chapters, and something popped up to me while I was reading that I thought would be worth sharing. Um, One of the reasons that I don't really get into um, creation science anymore, um, and I don't really engage a whole lot in arguments that what we see in the gospel doesn't look very much like what we see now, um, because I don't think that everything is always the same as it is now. That I don't think there's enough evidence in the last 300 years of kind of modern understanding of the universe to be able to say that 5,000 years ago everything was the same. Things haven't changed in 300 years, by and large. We can say that, but one of the and this is part of why like the Orthodox and the Catholic and Lutheran churches don't really get worked up over their speaking in tongues and the charismatic gifts, because we believe it's something that existed, and it was something that carried through until the New Testament could be complete, until the canon, as it were. And it's kind of interesting looking at what books were and weren't in the canon until God's word was complete and made available. And as soon as God's word was made available, the special effects stopped compensating. That's kind of the traditional view of this, in Catholicism and other old. And like I've said in my descriptions, I'm a medieval style Christian, so I agree with that. Um, and so one of the arguments that an atheist put forward to me in the past week is that all of the records of people being demon possessed and all the supernatural stuff that is recorded is proof that the Bible isn't trustworthy, because look around. I don't see demon possessed people. I don't see a bunch of supernatural stuff. Well, one, a lot of the supernatural things that happen in the Bible, I would say the majority of supernatural things that happen in the Bible, weren't produced by Michael Bay. Um, they were much more subtle. God has to like tell people about a miracle that he's doing, or about how he's working on reality. Noah gets off the ark and God says, "So Noah, a couple things. You eat meat now. How's that?" Translation: I've just completely reworked your internal biology, and I did it so quickly and subtly that you didn't notice the difference. So here's what I changed. Now, a deity who's capable of making, God, I believe that God created and rules and, is actively supporting the functions of the universe. Um, and somebody, I like that story best because it illustrates the non uniformity of history. Um, and so I don't really get bothered that things may or may not look like they did. But something that occurred to me as I was going through the Gospel of Matthew: if you read just the story of the birth and the early childhood of Jesus, which begins in the Gospel of Matthew records, something very interesting is that we begin to see what this atheist was talking about. Already, there are signs in the heavens, and there are angels appearing in dreams, and all of these supernatural things are happening. Again, they're happening quietly, So for the atheist who's looking around and saying, or the crackpot whack job who started the charismatic movement because, hey, it's no fair, they got special effects and I didn't, and ended up basically reproducing the kind of ecstatic experiences that shamanism has been producing in every religion across the world. Speaking in tongues really isn't all that different than watching somebody channel a spirit in Asian mysticism or in African shamanism. It's pretty much identical. A lot of the modern charismatic gifts pretty much look a lot like being demon possessed. um, And then you dig into the wording of the Bible, and it does describe something quite different. Anyway, but I'm digressing a little bit. Uh, if the Bible is true, if God, and I believe it is, and if the incarnation of Christ is the focal point, the apex of this reality, you know, everything before was building up to it, and everything afterwards is flowing down from it, and the life of Christ is at the center, of this pyramid of the history of the world, is the center point of the history of the world. Um, this is the primary supernatural conflict since before time started. Apparently Satan's rebellion happened before people were, before day 6. So since then, and probably this is more important than that because of even greater everlasting consequences. So you expect this battle to be fought. If there is Satan, and if the Bible claims that there's an enemy, his name literally is the accuser, um, then you'd expect. It seems perfectly natural and logical to me that the big fight, the supernatural conflict, was greatest at the most crucial supernatural moment in the history of the world. This isn't a mind-bogglingly alien concept. It isn't even really all that different than what we look at in science. If you look at warning tremors and aftershocks of an immense earthquake. Well, this kind of earthquake determined and shifted and dominated all of spirituality since, from creation till the end of this world and the beginning of a new reality. All of it is centered on the incarnation of Christ. And so it doesn't surprise me that things that are supernatural, that things are beyond human comprehension, are going to happen much more frequently, at ground zero of the spiritual earthquake that Christ's incarnation is, than it would be now. That being said, even looking at this high point, if you really look at it, it's very easy to see how these supernatural things could be missed. Angels are showing up left and right. It's really a big deal for most people. They believe they've seen an angel once in their entire life, and they're showing up for Joseph at a point where, okay, go down there, wait for me, I'll come back and tell you when to go up. Oh, and by the way, on the road trip back, I'll show up and give you another hint. I mean, Joseph's dream life really is kind of amazing. Now, if I were, a skeptic, if I were hostile to the gospel, how would I be able to see? How would I be able to know? It makes sense that we can have this recorded because the gospel record shows that Mary, the mother of Jesus, who was kind of there at Jesus' birth and around those events, kind of a big deal for mom, might have maybe talked to her husband. So we have an eyewitness available to the person recording the record. Again, Jesus tells John, hey, look, you're taking care of my mom now. And John wrote one of the Gospels. And, the disciples kind of hung out. So there are various sources. It's very interesting. Matthew, being from a scribal family, had accurate access to all these real careful records, and would have been part of this culture where people in his family would have quite easily been expected to memorize the entire New Old Testament, and probably a lot of Haggadah and Halakha, the Jewish traditional writings as well, because that was well underway by this point. And so he's got a lot of references. He's got the big genealogy. He's constantly going back and forth. John, Peter, who doesn't have access to all this detailed, first-hand access to all this detailed record, who's a fisherman, who's a blue-collar guy, and then he's writing to the Romans, who could give a shit about backwater messiah, backwater prophecies. They care about power, order. You see Jesus, you see the record focusing on the things Jesus did that showed power and order, and then Luke being the closest to what we would consider probably a modern mind, given that he was scholastically trained in Greeks, and that's kind of the descendant of Western, the ancestral hotbed of Western thought. Where he opens his account by talking about, well, I went and I researched this and I collected this and I interviewed people and this kind of thing goes on. And then John, who from all accounts was like a teenage boy, late teens maybe, during this, he talks very much on the relational level, and doesn't cover a lot of the other things that the other three do. Anyway, that's kind of interesting. So, but a lot of these miracles, if you weren't there and if it wasn't explained to you, even the disciples didn't get what they were seeing again and again and again. It records this, and this is something that makes the gospel very, very different than every other mythology. You look at all the other mythologies and all the other contemporary religions. I can't think of another one outside of Judeo-Christianity where the people who will end up being the authorities are shown as being selfish, being clueless, being infighting, being fractious, all of the bad things that humanity is, all the things that we do, it's embodied in the 12. There's cheaters, there's a murderer, there's a political whack job in Simon the Zealot. They have a zealot, so they've got a political, he'd be the guy wearing a Che Guevara shirt, and marching and maybe blowing up post office boxes like some of Obama's friends. But, you got political rebels, you got blue collar guys, you've got the intellectual elite of society with Matthew, and then later on Luke and Paul. Paul probably shows up as the intellectual elite, comparable to the intellectual elite of the Greco-Roman world. And they don't sugarcoat it. They act like jackasses. They don't get it. Even the things they saw and they witnessed, Jesus had to explain to them after he came back from the dead. They still don't get it. So the other thing that was occurring to me is how really arrogant. You have to build the argument of evidence on the ability of the human mind to understand truth. If I'm going to judge what is true and what is not by what I can understand, then I am saying my mind is great enough to encompass all that is. There's no two ways around that. If your mind is not great enough and perfect enough to rationally understand everything that is, then you cannot say it is not because I don't get it, because there are things that you may not understand. If the human mind is not the greatest thing in the entire universe, then why do we expect the human mind to be able to comprehend and describe the universe accurately? Modern science is actually based on a religious idea from the latter Middle Ages. Kind of gets started with Thomas Aquinas, actually, natural philosophy that because there was a God, the nature was made in a way that we could understand because God wanted to reveal himself to us. This really is kind of the idea that gets science started in Western society. Don't tell, the science versus religion crowd that. Both shit kids. But, look it up. Go read Thomas Aquinas. It's very interesting. It's true. Thomas Aquinas was an epic smartass and really serious. It was kind of cool. I'll wrap it up with my favorite Thomas Aquinas joke. Little anecdote. Where the other monks who were, would make fun of him for being so serious. And at one point, one of the monks over by the window looked up and said, "Look, Brother Thomas, a flying cow!" And Brother Thomas ran over the window, and all the other monks were, "You believed in a flying cow? You're so gullible, you stupid religious, man." And Thomas Aquinas looked at him and said, "I would rather believe that a cow could fly than a monk would lie." I really do like that. There's some really great quotes out of the Middle Ages. All right. Anyway, so that was my primary thought about expectation and kind of conformity and the role of human reason. Do I worship my own brain or the brains of humanity? which in and of itself seems contraindicated by evolutionary theory. If we're just kind of really lucky globs of goo, then what makes you, we should, in terms of the complexity of the universe, we're really not all that more impressive than a pot of slime mold, and we wouldn't, we don't expect a petri dish to grasp the nature of reality. And it's kind of arrogant to think that we're in that worldview. Why are you so much better than that? Anyway, so those were that. I had a gospel, my stammering attempt to go through French today, and then I had a couple apologetics thoughts to shoot out there. Again, I'm Bruce the Monk, and if nobody's told you about Jesus, I'm the nobody to ask. All right, have a good day.